Hello, this is Angelia with today's wisdom. Today's wisdom comes from Daily Ohm, Personal Tales, Writing Your Story, which I've written most of mine. And I had someone talking to me the other day who said, if you are a Christian, why are you sharing wisdoms from other faiths and cultures? Okay, easy answer to that is, I've been around a lot of people and, growing up and in my travels in life. And a big problem in the world is ignorance. People are ignorant of each other's belief systems. People demonize other people's belief systems. And that's how division starts. And there's a lot of division in the world today. Divisiveness and ignorance. And I personally think that's not good. That's not what Jesus said to do. So I would rather teach to enlighten or inform you about other belief systems, because there is value in them. And there are folks, and Gandhi said, there is one God and he has 1,000 names. And that could be right for all we know. Because if you're that steadfast in your belief system, you think it's the right way, there's other people in other parts of the world who feel the same exact way. So, and it's like I have said before, would someone in India have listened to a Jewish man that came to talk to them? Would someone in, say South Africa listen to a Indian man who came to talk to them? So Jesus said he had other flocks and other people to go see. So, it could be that maybe this is how it is, and we're supposed to put aside our differences and find out what we have in common, because all religions have something in common. All belief systems do. So I would rather, teach you a little about other cultures and their belief systems than cast divisions and demonization on people of other cultures. So, I'm trying to give you a little wisdom, little enlightenment, so that you're not going to be ignorant. Because I think that's a shame in this world. So that is why I teach wisdoms from different cultures. So, here we go. Everyone, at one time or another, has wanted to express his or her story. And I think we all want to be heard. We all want, people to understand us. Writing a memoir to read privately, which with some of my coaching clients and students, I told them to do that. Start a journal, journal. Write your story down. If you think you got a story to tell, write it down. Share with family or friends, and some people do that. They want other people to see what they've written down. Some people don't. They think it's very private. Or publish is an emotionally satisfying way to gain perspective on your experiences while sharing your unique voice. And now I have written a series of books called The Secrets of the Closet Monsters, and some of my stories in there, but there were other women. When I first started doing coaching, I ran into a lot of older women who have now passed, and I told them, I said, someday I'm going to write a book. Can I use your story? They said, yeah, sure. Most of them said, even my own mother had said, I could put some stuff in there, but not to use her name, which of course I wouldn't do. So even though it's a fiction series, it's in general fiction on Amazon, but it's based on true stories. I've compiled all these people's stories into one character, and told it from their life point of view. So that's been very satisfying and cathartic, to get that out there. Because I know I'm not the only one, who was abused growing up. And so I feel like, it is good for us, survivors of abuse and assault, to put that out there. So, it purges the garbage inside of us, and it lets other survivors know they're not the only ones out there, because you do feel very alone. We've all experienced feelings and events in our lives that we are longing to write down. And, most of us have. I know people who've had a pretty good life and don't have any real complaints, and I'm always jealous of those people because, that's how mine didn't roll out. But giving into the urge can give you an outlet for purging any frustration, anxiety, or long dormant feelings. And it is. If you get it out, like I say, there are evil forces in this world, and they will feed on your garbage. If you don't take out your garbage, they're going to feed on that. And they're going to mess your personality up. They're going to mess your behaviors up. And they're going to have a dark influence on your life. One of the classes I used to teach was called Defeating Dark Influences. That is a real problem for some folks. No one else has to read it, and they don't. If you want to keep it to yourself, that's fine. I have someone, when I came out and said I had been molested, they wanted me to give names. And I'm like, no, I have a right to my privacy. I can say that this happened, but I don't have to give names. But they were afraid that someone might think it was them, that did this stuff. And I said, if people really want to know, they'll ask me. But none of them asked me, so they didn't really want to know. You may even want to write your story without reading it right away. And sometimes, I've done that in journaling, and I journaled something, then I put it aside, and I don't want to think about it, and then later on I might come back and look over those feelings. I had a situation where someone was, being really mean to me, and I just put it aside, and then I came back later on, because everyone around me was siding with me, and I said, I don't feel like I did anything to cause this. So I came back later on and read the stuff and said, yeah, I didn't. This was definitely their deal, not mine. So, satisfying the need to tell your story is not predicated upon your writing ability, and it's not, because now you can self-publish, and I've read some books that are pretty. Let's see, how do you put this nicely? From people whose literacy skills are not super duper. Now, I'm not saying mine are the best in the world, but in the books I write, they're aimed at a certain audience, and the way the speech goes is usually because I want it to be conveyed in that manner. Because I've had someone say, well, you should have, this is not, I was like, I know, I don't want it to be. This is how she would say this. This is how they would say this. That's how I want it to be. And they're like, oh, okay. Because sometimes critics think, it has to be perfect. And their version of perfect might not be what you think is perfect for that particular piece of writing. It does, however, take effort to write down the truth in detail. And it does. I mean, when I started my book, the first in that series, it took years and years and years. And I revised that first edition, I know, probably at least 7 or 8 times. But I started it, and I'd put it aside because the feelings were rough. And I'd start it, and then I'd get to a point and I would just put it aside. Because, I was just, it was rough to put that out there. And I was a little afraid. So it took a long time. It took me years and years to get this book out. I mean, I started writing stuff down. My husband has a picture of me typing at my desk in our first apartment back in 1985. So, and the first book in that series didn't come out till much later. So, it was something that was on the back burner for a long time. But finally I said, I know I'm not the only one. I've gone through, therapy and group, and, I know people need to hear these stories. It's not pretty. Some people might not want to deal with it because they don't want to look into their own, closet. But I think it's an important thing to get stories like this out there. And if you had something that really impacted your life and made you feel like it changed your life, you might want to write it down and put it out there. Your memories, captured on paper as descriptive scenes, sights, sounds, and scents, may at first seem disconnected or incomplete. And I know I had that going on because I repressed a lot of things I don't remember. I was running full speed on shaky ground trying to get away from, my past, because it was not great. So, there was a lot of stuff I pushed back. Like I said, pushed back to the back burner. And bits and pieces would come up. And eventually, I, remembered enough where there was a timeline there. And I said, okay, well, you know what? It's time for me to do this. And so I did it. It wasn't easy. It was hard. And I knew there'd be some backlash from people in denial, and making excuses for their behaviors. But I didn't care. And that's like I told my mom when I started writing it. She was still alive. She's passed away since then. But I told her I was going to do it. And she said, well, there were mistakes made. And all I ask is that you don't use my name. And of course I wouldn't, I didn't use anybody's real name. So, and then there were people who thought more than one character was about them. And I'm like, no, but okay. Way to be, paranoid. But, rest assured that you possess the ability to shape your recollections into stories. And like I said, I came up with the idea of having one main character. And then these other people's lives and things that happen to them, I put into this one character's life as well. So it's not all my story. It's a compiled story of probably about 4 or 5 women. And like I said, most of these ladies, my first client I had, my first coaching client was, 82 years old, and she'd never told anybody what happened to her, but she called me. I'd been out in the neighborhood putting out flowers, and she called me and said, I'd like to do this. I'd like to try this. There's things I've never told anybody, and I'd like to talk about it. So I came over there, and she unloaded all this stuff on me, and she felt better, and I could tell she did, and, I saw her a few more times about it, and, but she passed away a few years later. And then there's a couple more that they were older in their 70s and 80s. And then there's one woman who's in an institution. And so, I told them if I ever made it big, I'd cut them in on the cut if these books ever became a movie or made money or anything like that. But they never have. And, I get a trickle of every now and then someone buys a book. Someone in Japan bought a book, and I was happy that someone in Japan read my book. But you might be able to hear my neighbor mowing, because I got 2 big picture windows right here, and in my dining room. So you could probably hear my neighbor mowing. So hopefully you can hear me over them. But they're mowing right here beside my house. But anyway. I feel bad that I didn't make any money for them, because I would have loved to have made some money for these women. These are dear, sweet women who are survivors of abuse. And I would have loved to cut them in on it, but they're gone now. Everyone wants to be heard. Of course we all do. We want to be heard. Reading your story to others can meet that need, if you want to do that. Like I said, I started trying to talk to people and did not get a great reception, except for, my mom. She was like, yes, I know, stuff happened, mistakes were made. I had my own baggage. She was, she told me what she was dealing with. I was surprised. But she had her own deal going on. So, sometimes all it takes is one person to say, I understand. Yeah, that was bad. And you have a right to be feeling like you felt, Writing your story can also help you understand your life experiences. And sometimes what you understand is not great, because you realize the people around you treated you not great, and different from, other people. And like I said, sometimes codependent families need a scapegoat. They need a dog to kick. And it seems like each generation has one. And when you finish writing, you may be surprised at what you have accomplished. Because when I finally finished my book and I read it through, I was like, you know what? This is pretty good. And I was proud of myself for actually doing it. Because like I said, I'd put it off for, like 20, 30 years. So, I was happy that I actually sat down and was able to do it. Your story can encompass as much or as little of your life as you prefer. And now mine certainly didn't encompass all of my life, but just the things I thought were important to look at. You may surprise yourself with new insights, or you may find yourself exploring your roots, your identity, and your future through your words. And some people, they need that. Allow your writing to guide you and write as truthfully as possible. And that's why I said the secrets of the closet monster, because I said no more secrets in my life. My husband has said I tell too much to people, and I was like, no more secrets. That's it. I'm not going to keep stuff secret, because I was asked to in my family. I was asked to in previous marriages, and I'm like, I'm not keeping people's secrets no more. If you wasn't doing something you shouldn't have been doing that I have to keep it secret, then that's your secret, not mine. Don't worry about what others will think of your personal journey, your style of writing, or your words, because it's your experience that's important. When you're writing for you, that's your experience, and that's the important thing. Each individual has their own perspective, and the unique experience is what's important there. Other people, gonna say whatever they want to, and that's fine, because what you have experienced is what matters. Research has shown that writing a personal narrative filled with feelings and perceptions can create long-term health benefits. It can, because like I said, you're taking out your garbage. Because when you let garbage sit in here and fester, like I say, dark force is going to feed on that, but it's also going to affect your outlook on life, your psyche. It's going to affect your emotions and your behavior. So, what you need to do is purge that and get it out. And writing can be one avenue of that. Therapy can be one avenue of that, As you write, remember to have compassion for yourself. And that's the most important thing, to have compassion for yourself. I had to learn that because, I was being told I was like this bad, dumb, hateful, indecent person. And I just felt like that. And then once I started and I looked back and I realized, actually, I was a pretty good person. I wasn't doing anything that other kids weren't doing, so I wasn't that bad. I wasn't out stealing. I wasn't killing people. So I wasn't that bad. And, I wasn't dumb. I actually got tested in the 8th grade because my parents thought I was dumb. And to their surprise, I had an IQ of 122 in the 8th grade. It's higher than that now. But, that was how I felt, because that's what I was being told. I am a loving person. I have a big heart. And, things, I'm a sensitive person. So, if you're mean to me, that's going to definitely bother me, and I'm going to notice it. I like to love on people. I'm a loving person, and I like to love on people. You can ask anyone in my family and friends that, they know. You need to have compassion for yourself, because you live through your own unique experience, and if no one else showed you that, you can do that for yourself. And with a lot of inner child work, that's the thing that they stress, because you need to realize that you were a lovable child, and maybe the people around you didn't love you like they should have. Particularly when writing about traumatic events. And we all have gone through some kind of traumatic event. And it is good to write it down and talk about it. Write a book, write a song, paint a picture, whatever. But purge that out of you so that it doesn't sit in there and fester. If you are a young person, you can add to your life story as you grow older. And some people do that. They keep the journal, and then someday they decide, I'm going to take my journals and I'm going to make it into a book or, a song or whatever. That's, I think, helpful to everyone, because you contribute to the human experience, and other people can relate to that. Your writing may help family members know you better, or decide that they don't and everything you saying ain't true, and, but there are people who are gonna, be on the same page with you, and those are the people that matter. Or they may understand themselves more through reading about your experiences. Because some people don't get their own actions. They're very centric on themselves. egocentric is the pop psychology word. That's not even a real thing, because the ego doesn't be the ego. But anyway, as people say, we ain't gonna get into all that stuff right here. But you know, when other people read an experience like that, if they had an experience like that, it helps them feel not alone. And if they didn't, it helps other people get a little insight into how this made you feel. Because some people get hung up on what you're saying and not the feelings of things, because they don't care. You know, that's just, some people just don't care. More importantly, you are expressing yourself in a permanent way, giving a gift to yourself, and letting your voice be heard. Like I said, my books are there on Amazon and Kindle now, and people all over the world can buy them. You know, like I said, someone in Japan bought one. I was so happy. Someone in Japan bought one. But, you know, it don't take much to make me happy, as my husband said. It's the little things. But, you know, you are giving the gift of love to yourself when you express your, you know, life story. Because you're taking out your own garbage, and making space for better things to come into your life. And you're letting people hear your voice, because, like I say, the human condition is not great for everybody. And so if you can get your voice out there, and other people can hear that and commiserate and say, well, you know what, I had that happen to me too, or, you know, I felt like that when this happened to me. And that helps us all, you know, be a little better. And that's why, you know, I read a lot of books. You might have noticed a few books, you know, over here. Just a few. But behind my stack there, there's actually a closet that was used as a pantry. It has shelves in it, and it's 2 sections, and that is full of books, 3 deep, because the shelves are, you know, like that deep, and it's like 3 deep and stacked on top of each other. You know, I'm well read. You know, I am from Kentucky, so I might sound like I'm not, but you know, that's because I grew up with people with these accents. So, you know, but I am well read and studied, you know, to the PhD level, you know, so I do know what I'm talking about. I might not always sound like a dude because I'm from Kentucky, but that's a whole nother story. So, you know, if you have a personal tale to tell, you know, you might want to write your story down, and maybe somebody else can learn something from it. Think about it. Please like and share this wisdom so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. The links to that is in my posts. Thanks for watching. That's all for now. Until next time.